Vladimir Putin's highly anticipated 2026 spring offensive in Ukraine has catastrophically collapsed before it could achieve a single one of its core strategic objectives. The Kremlin's blueprint for the year was absolute and uncompromising: rapidly finish the conquest of the Donbass, completely shatter Ukraine's historic fortress belt, encircle the strategic hub of Kramatorsk, and force a total Ukrainian capitulation on Moscow's terms. For a brief moment earlier this year, the international community held its breath as Russian forces finally seized the logistics heart of Pokrovsk after months of bloody, grueling urban combat. Western headlines blared with apocalyptic warnings, suggesting that the entire Eastern Front would collapse and that Donetsk was effectively lost for good. Yet, 6 months have passed since those dire predictions, and the Ukrainian front line has not buckled. Instead, Russia's greatest tactical victory has mutated into its deepest, most devastating strategic trap, leaving its primary assault formations entirely spent and exposed to a brutal new reality. While the Russian military machine bled tens of thousands of its finest men dry, trying to push past the smoking rubble of Pokrovsk, Ukraine was quietly rewriting the fundamental rules of modern land warfare. On the 15th of May 2026, the illusion of Russian offensive momentum was shattered entirely on the battlefield. In a single, coordinated operational window, Ukrainian forces did the unthinkable. They violently pivoted from a deep defensive posture and went on a massive counteroffensive, advancing rapidly on 3 separate fronts simultaneously. This stunning multi-axis breakthrough was not a lucky, one-day coincidence or a localized anomaly, but rather the first major real-world test of Ukraine's highly integrated new war doctrine. It provided undeniable, data-driven proof to international military observers that beneath the aggressive propaganda of the state media, the Russian army is physically, technologically, and psychologically collapsing from within. To fully understand the gravity of this shifting tide, one must look directly at the tactical data coming out of the Kharkiv axis, where the 129th Heavy Mechanized Brigade targeted the crucial village of Odradne. Russian forces had originally captured this location back in November 2025, immediately turning it into a heavily fortified stronghold as part of their wider cross-border pressure operations against Ukrainian logistics. For 6 months, Russian engineers worked tirelessly to fortify the sector, digging deep, interconnected trench systems, establishing reinforced firing positions within the local wooded areas, and laying vast, intricate minefields. Russian soldiers openly considered Odradne an unassailable fortress that could withstand months of standard artillery bombardment. Yet, on May 15th, the Ukrainian military completely dismantled these formidable fortifications in a matter of hours, utilizing a revolutionary tactical formula executed by 2 specialized units, the Shkval Assault Battalion and the Rugby Team UAV Battalion. This new Ukrainian battlefield formula relies on a highly disciplined, multi-layered sequence designed to maximize enemy casualties while keeping friendly losses to an absolute minimum. First, the Rugby Team UAV Battalion deploys hundreds of advanced reconnaissance and electronic warfare drones to blanket the sky, systematically geolocating every hidden Russian bunker, trench line, and machine gun nest. Once the precise targeting data is fed into the digital network, high-precision artillery batteries unleash a suppressed, focused barrage to pin the defenders underground and destroy their local communications. Only when the enemy is completely blinded and suppressed does the highly trained Shkval infantry move in with rapid armored vehicles to secure the trenches. Using this exact methodology, the Ukrainian 16th Army Corps confirmed that 22 square kilometers of deeply fortified territory were liberated in a single afternoon. The most telling detail of the Odradne breakthrough was not the physical territory reclaimed, but the near-instantaneous psychological collapse of the defending Russian troops. Independent conflict intelligence monitors, including the highly reliable Deep State Network, explicitly noted in their field reports that those Russian soldiers who could escape immediately fled into the rear, abandoning a heavily reinforced stronghold that took 6 months to build after just a few hours of combat points to a structural rot far deeper than mere physical exhaustion. The Kremlin's desperate policy of sending replacement troops to the front lines with only a single week of basic training has utterly stripped the rank-and-file soldiers of basic defensive reflexes and tactical cohesion. At Odradne, the Russian resistance was practically non-existent, morale was at absolute zero, and tactical coordination between units was completely broken. This humiliating rout was a mirror image of the overall state of the entire Eastern European theater on May 15th. Simultaneously to the south, intense Ukrainian counterattacks along the vital Kostyantynivka front completely halted a weeks-long Russian armored push, throwing the attackers back to their original starting lines. The Institute for the Study of War confirmed in its official daily assessment that Ukrainian forces had successfully advanced in both the Kharkiv and Kostyantynivka directions. Furthermore, visual confirmation emerged from the northern Slovyansk direction near Vovchansk, where the 23rd Assault Regiment successfully overran Russian positions and captured a significant number of frontline prisoners. In a single day, across 3 distinct geographic axes, 3 completely different Ukrainian units proved that the strategic initiative has fundamentally changed hands, forcing Russia onto a chaotic defensive posture it cannot sustain. The ultimate significance of the May 15th three-front advance lies in what it reveals about the total degradation of Russia's offensive capacity. The entire 2026 Kremlin strategy was built on breaking through the historic fortress belt, a formidable 50-kilometer chain of heavily fortified cities stretching from Kostyantynivka to Kramatorsk that Ukraine has reinforced since 2014. If this belt falls, the roads to the strategic centers of Dnipro, Zaporizhia, and Kyiv open up completely. Russia threw its entire localized reserve into cracking this defensive wall, but the results have been a statistical disaster for Moscow. In Kostyantynivka, where Russian troops originally managed to infiltrate the eastern outskirts in late 2025, they have failed to make a single tactically significant gain in over 6 months, with their maximum rate of advance grinding down to a miserable 1 kilometer per week at the cost of hundreds of lives. Behind this operational paralysis lies a grim, unyielding mathematical reality that the Kremlin can no longer hide from its population. According to leaked military intelligence reports and verified independent tracking data, Russia is currently losing an average of 35,000 soldiers per month to deaths, severe injuries, and desertions. Concurrently, Russia's domestic monthly mobilization apparatus is only capable of generating roughly 27,000 new recruits, even with massive cash sign-on bonuses. This means the Kremlin is facing a negative deficit of 8,000 soldiers every single month, a completely unsustainable equation for Russia's current demographic and political stability. To try and patch this massive bleeding wound, commanders have been forced to cut infantry training down to 1 week, effectively turning their new formations into completely untrained targets that lack the capability to execute complex maneuvers or resist sophisticated drone-driven assaults. The downstream effects of this human deficit are colliding directly with the immovable physical reality of Ukraine's defensive geography. The historic fortress belt, the structural backbone of the entire Donbass defense, remains an unbroken wall that has completely paralyzed the Russian General Staff's operational planning. For over half a year, the Kremlin has poured its remaining mechanized reserves into the Kostyantynivka and Chasiv Yar axes, operating under rigid, top-down orders to secure a breakthrough at any human cost. Yet, the Institute for the Study of War's latest multi-month assessments paint an incredibly bleak picture for Moscow, confirming that Russian forces have failed to achieve a single operationally significant breakthrough across the entire 50-kilometer defensive line. The fighting has degenerated into a localized war of attrition that mirrors the most stagnant periods of 20th century trench warfare rather than a modern blitzkrieg. This systemic stagnation is vividly illustrated by the ongoing disaster at Chasiv Yar, a strategically vital city built on elevated terrain that has successfully held out against continuous Russian assaults for more than 20 consecutive months. Capturing this high ground is an absolute prerequisite for the Russian military, as it would grant their artillery units direct, uncompromised line-of-sight targeting over the lower-lying logistical hubs of Kostyantynivka and Kramatorsk. Recognizing this vulnerability, the Russian command launched 2 massive, concentrated mechanized assaults utilizing heavy armor and infantry fighting vehicles. According to verified battlefield telemetry and geolocated footage, both assaults were systematically annihilated before they could even reach the city's outer defensive perimeters. The catastrophic failure of these armor columns exposed a profound rot within the Russian military structure. The total collapse of basic combined arms coordination between advancing armored units and supporting infantry formations. The primary driver behind this sudden tactical blindness is the total degradation of Russian battlefield communications. Following SpaceX's successful implementation of a highly secure, whitelisted terminal access system, the Russian military completely lost its unauthorized access to the Starlink satellite network. Deprived of this critical digital spine, Frontline commanders have been plunged into near-total radio silence, rendering them incapable of distributing real-time drone reconnaissance or coordinating artillery fire support with advancing troops. Launching armored assaults under these conditions is the tactical equivalent of running blindly into the dark. It is this profound technological deafness that explains why highly sophisticated Russian main battle tanks are routinely driving directly into known Ukrainian minefields or sitting stationary under targeted drone strikes without ever realizing where the incoming fire is originating. The psychological fallout of these repeated, blind failures has triggered a massive domino effect across the entire eastern theater of operations. Elite units, including the historically formidable 90th Tank Division and veteran VDV airborne formations, are being rapidly shifted from one burning sector of the front to another in a desperate game of tactical whack-a-mole. Every time the Russian command pulls a depleted unit from the line to reinforce a collapsing flank in Donetsk, they inadvertently open a massive vulnerability in the southern or northern sectors. Independent operational assessments indicate that the Russian Fifth Army alone has sustained over 20,000 casualties in the Hulyai-Pol area, forcing commanders to cannibalize the rear echelons of the 29th and 36th Combined Arms Armies just to maintain a cohesive defensive line. This constant chaotic shuffling of depleted forces has utterly shattered the morale of the surviving officer corps. Among the rank-and-file soldiers, a devastating realization is spreading through the trenches. They are not being positioned to achieve a historic victory, but are simply being used as human placeholders to delay an inevitable Ukrainian counteroffensive. The grand strategic objective of encircling Kramatorsk, which looked highly organized on the maps inside the Kremlin's secure briefing rooms, has disintegrated on the ground into a series of disconnected, localized disasters. Russia's frontline military machine has reached a historic paradox where it still possesses massive numerical superiority on paper, yet completely lacks the organizational infrastructure, tactical flexibility, and technological capability to convert that raw power into actual territory. The crisis paralyzing the Russian frontline is no longer contained within the muddy trenches of the Donbass, but has rapidly spilled over into the internal stability of the Russian state itself. The political cost of Ukraine's aggressive, mid-range, and deep strike disruption campaigns has reached an unmanageable threshold for the Kremlin. This internal fracture became undeniable following the sudden simultaneous dismissal of the governors of the Belgorod and Bryansk border regions. These high-level political purges were a direct, desperate reaction to the escalating collapse of local security, driven by relentless Ukrainian drone strikes that have systematically targeted and dismantled Russia's primary petroleum infrastructure. By successfully hitting key processing facilities like the massive oil refineries, Ukrainian long-range capabilities have effectively crippled central Russian oil processing, triggering massive domestic fuel shortages and forcing the state into an economically devastating defensive posture. This industrial disruption has triggered a brutal economic feedback loop that is tearing through the Kremlin's domestic propaganda narratives. While state-controlled television networks continuously broadcast exaggerated victory claims regarding the Donbass, Russia's independent military blogging community has completely broken rank, openly criticizing the high command for structural incompetence and tactical stagnation. Facing relentless public pressure, the Russian Ministry of Economic Development was forced to significantly downgrade its official 3-year GDP growth expectations, citing severe nationwide labor shortages. This severe economic drain is a direct consequence of the Kremlin's suboptimal mobilization policies, which prioritize throwing every single available body into the frontline meat grinder rather than sustaining the industrial workforce. Furthermore, the state's sovereign wealth fund has been steadily depleted of its liquid cash reserves to bankroll the skyrocketing costs of the invasion, forcing the government to aggressively auction off its physical gold reserves and hike domestic taxes just to prevent an immediate financial collapse. The symbolic culmination of this systemic vulnerability played out directly across the global stage during the annual May 9th Victory Day celebration on Moscow's Red Square. Historically used as an overwhelming showcase of cutting-edge Russian military might and technological supremacy, The 2026 parade was a barren, heavily scaled-down affair that stunned international defense experts. For the second consecutive year, the parade featured absolutely no modern main battle tanks, no advanced mechanized columns, and zero strategic missile arrays. British Defense Intelligence explicitly noted in its formal operational assessment that the highly restricted nature of the event was a glaring, public showcase of the Kremlin's deep strategic vulnerability. Vladimir Putin could not risk parading heavy armor through the streets of Moscow when his frontline commanders were desperately begging for replacements to plug the massive gaps opening up along the Eastern Front. The strategic deadlock currently confronting the Russian military closely mirrors one of the most infamous attritional disasters in human history, the 1916 Battle of Verdun during the First World War. Back then, German Chief of Staff Erich von Falkenhayn constructed a rigid campaign designed to bleed the French army white through a continuous, overwhelming expenditure of artillery and human lives. Yet, after 10 months of unspeakable slaughter and over 700,000 combined casualties, the military that found itself most profoundly broken, depleted, and structurally ruined was Germany's own. Vladimir Putin has fallen into that exact same historic trap at Pokrovsk and the Fortress Belt. He explicitly wagered that Russia's superior demographic mass could gradually exhaust Ukraine's defensive resolve over a multi-year timeline. But instead, he has completely exhausted his own offensive power, his technological infrastructure, and his domestic economic stability. Make no mistake, the Russian Federation still commands a massive footprint on the battlefield, maintaining over 700,000 personnel deployed along the front line, and retaining a highly destructive tactical aviation capability through the uninhibited use of heavy guided glide bombs. But as the data from the May 15th three-front breakthrough proves, there is an unbridgeable, permanent chasm between merely striking a target and actually converting that destruction into tangible, operationally significant territory. You can possess massive numerical superiority on paper, but if your communications are permanently blacked out by technological deafness, your armor columns are blind, and your replacement infantry receives only 7 days of training, your army ceases to be an offensive weapon. It simply becomes an accumulation of targets. The strategic initiative in Ukraine has fundamentally flipped. The red lines have been permanently redrawn, and the Russian war machine is rapidly running out of both time and men. If you found this deep, data-driven operational analysis valuable, make sure to hit that like button, share your perspective on Ukraine's high-tech drone integration in the comments down below, and subscribe to the channel with notifications turned on so you never miss another high-intensity breakdown of the shifting global balance of power.